Growing up during the 80s Cold War wasn't a lot of fun. I remember it being a time of great worry, and I couldn't understand why leaders of countries were constantly threatening each other with warmongering language. My teen years were littered with a sense of hopelessness, which I now know was the reason I rarely went to school after the age of 13. As the mid-80s arrived, the AIDS hysteria began. The BBC screamed 10 million in Britain will die of AIDS within 10 years. Today's children are bombarded with many dangers, such as terrorism and global warming. How is this affecting our future generations? Surely this is creating a fatalist generation. That is from Chris.
Right. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good, Stefan. How are you?
Well, oh, nice mic. I appreciate that.
Good. I put in a little extra effort.
Good. All right. So, what's your question? How is it affecting our future generations?
Yeah.
Well, it's making them feel small, insignificant, and subject to random forces beyond their control, for which they need a giant semi-fascistic protector in order to, like, the R versus K stuff that I've talked about in the Gene Wars presentations, which people should really check out. The R leaders are creating an R environment, which is an environment of random dangers where you need a big, powerful government to protect you from terrorism and global warming. And of course, back in our day, we were going to run out of oil. I remember mass starvation being predicted for England in the 1980s, and this was in the 1970s.
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, of course, there was the AIDS hysteria that it was going to cross over into the heterosexual population and kill millions of people and so on. And, I mean, you see these dangers regularly. I mean, there was the Ebola, there was ALR in apples, there was just, a wide variety. There was acid rain, there was a hole in the ozone layer. I've got a whole presentations on this, all the media scares I could think of in one breath. They do this for a variety of reasons, but basically it's just to make you feel afraid all the time. It's to make you feel afraid and helpless. If you can get, like, fight or flight is what this stuff is designed for, but if you can get people to be terrified and helpless, then they are very, very easy to rule. Terrified is not enough, because that's fight or flight. Helpless is not enough, because then they're apathetic. But if you can get them to be scared and feel helpless, then their fear will fuel the expansion of state musculature. And that is that's what it's all designed for, of course. And this is why, fundamentally, outside of the reasons of immediate profit, this is why governments sell massive amounts of arms around the world and then complain that there's danger in the world. I mean, if the police fund and arm the mafia and then say, well, of course, we need to raise your taxes because of the mafia, well, that's understandable from the point of view of the police and the tax collectors and the mafia. It's just not that good for everyone else. So, the degree of terror and anxiety and helplessness and dependence that is foisted upon children, it is the oldest game in the book. Terrify children and make them helpless, and then make them dependent. Hang on, and then make them dependent upon an outside power for salvation. All of this stuff directly mirrors, as I've said, the priests went into the media. If you want to look at the new religion, it's the mainstream media. The priests they went into communism, and then they went into the media, at least in the West, as the presage to socialism or communism. And so in the olden times, so to speak, and even in some sections of modern Christianity and other religions, there is the devil, and the devil has you in its grip, and the devil is in charge of the world, and you are helpless. You must pray, you must donate, you must subjugate yourself to the authority of the priest, because the devil is out there tempting you with evil, and you're helpless in the face of it. And even if you do all the right things without the blessing of the priest, you're never going to get into heaven. So terrifying people with these omnipresent devils in order to get them to subjugate themselves to a priestly class or a media class or a political class is natural. Sadism is extraordinarily profitable, and the most profitable sadism is that directed against children.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you agree that during the 80s, they did this whole media thing on the AIDS virus, that was intentional even back then?
It's instinctual. It's instinctual. I don't know, intentional, do they sit there and say, well, what's the next thing? But it's instinctual. I think that everybody kind of gets that if you can scare the crap out of people. Well, first of all, we're attuned as animals, we are attuned to danger. And the risk of ignoring danger is far higher than the reward of ignoring danger, right? So if you are in the woods and you hear a snapping of a twig behind you, well, it's probably just, you stepped somewhere and the twig is popping up, or a branch fell, or it's a squirrel, or something like that.
Yeah.
So how much effort does it take for you to turn around and look? Not much.
Yeah.
How much effort does it take for you to start gearing up a little bit of the adrenaline and the cortisol and the fight or flight mechanism? Well, not that. It's not very costly to you. However, if you just decide to shrug it off and say, oh, it's nothing, right? And it is a bear or a saber-toothed tiger or something else that's going to rip your face off for lunch, well, bye-bye, right? You've lost crucial seconds by which you can run, climb a tree, fight back, do something, right?
Yeah.
And so as biological organisms, we are attuned to be constantly scanning for danger. And particularly as K-selected human beings, the more K-selected you are, the more anxious you are about long-term problems, like eating your seed crop over the winter and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so particularly the Asians and the Caucasians are very much attuned to potential dangers down the road. And so when the newspaper says 10 million might die of AIDS, now you could say, there's this old Paul Simon song where he says, I don't believe what I read in the papers. They're just out to capture my dime. And you might say, oh, well, who cares, right? I mean, they're just trying to capture my dime. It's just a bunch of nonsense and so on. However, if they are correct that there's this massive immune system destroying virus making its way through the population and you ignore it, you might die. So it's all just Pascal's wager. Hey, we might be full of bullshit, but if we're not, as opposed to, well, there might not be a God in heaven and hell, but if there is and you go to hell, that's really, really bad. Pascal's wager, of course, is, well, the downside is so huge and the upside is not that costly. So forget it, right?
Yeah.
Or another way of putting it, the downside is so huge, but the costs of ignoring the downside are even worse, right? So, if there is a God and I don't believe, I don't have to get up early on Sundays and I save a little bit of my money for donations, but then I go to hell. So you just make the negative so huge that you get people's attention. That, I think, just hooks into hardwired biological aspects to our personality. The problem is, of course, the boy who cried wolf, right? And the reason it works so well on the young is the young are not experienced enough to know, right? This is the first time they've ever heard this boy crying wolf. So they're like, a wolf, we're going to go out and, right? Whereas, when you get older, I'm going to be 50 this year. And when you get older, you're like, I've heard this so many times before, and there is this general transfer of bitter wisdom as you age, where you just realize that the fearmongers are so full of lies and so full of sadism and all that it's ridiculous. Because the young people, well, and I haven't heard wolf that much. And it's kind of, for those who have a decent conscience, and I think that this fear of future negative consequences has something to do with empathy, insofar as you have to have empathy for your future self, which is why empathy and worry tend to go hand in hand. And so where there is greater empathy and greater worry, the people who are most susceptible to this kind of fear-mongering have a very tough time putting themselves into the mindset of people who would scare children for money and power. Because if you have empathy, you probably don't really want to do that, and it's hard to recognize that we're not all the same species. We might look the same, but we're about as similar as the cyborgs and the human beings on the new Battlestar Galactica. And it looked the same, except for that whole glowing spine orgasm thing, which I actually think would be pretty cool, but topic for another time. So if you are most susceptible to caution, to fear, to worry, to planning for the future and being aware of alarming information and acting on it, means you have more empathy, I would argue. But because you have more empathy, it's unimaginable to you that these people could just be making stuff up for fun and profit and power. So I think that's one of the weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to something you just said there, which group of the R's and K's would be the most susceptible to the fear-mongering?
Well, the R's are good at fear-mongering, and the K's are susceptible to fear-mongering.
So, that's what I thought. Right. Okay. Yeah. And the K's have
because the K's deal with reality, and the R's manipulate people, and so the R's are better at that, right?
And would you call it's basically what the media do upon our children is low-level terrorism?
Yeah, I mean, terrorism, I mean, that's the use of violence for political change. Yeah. If you would count verbal abuse as violence, fear-mongering as violence, I think you could certainly say that. Terrorism? And it certainly does, it does create, there is a show called Orange is the New Black. And there's this, I think what's colloquially called a diesel dyke in it. And she's talking to this low-rent, crooked tooth character called Doggett, and she goes into this whole explanation about how basically it's good that your kids died because they would have grown up to be criminals, right? Yeah. And the question is, who do these concerns work on the most?
The young people.
Who do these concerns work on the most? They work on the most conscientious people, and they work on the people who have the greatest sensitivity to future disasters. And I would also argue they work on slightly less intelligent people. And, that generally tends to be whites. Whites slightly less intelligent than Asians, considerably less intelligent than Ashkenazi Jews. And whites have evolved to be very cautious about future disasters, very scared of future disasters. And this I think is particularly true because whites were a roaming group. Right. I mean, they explored the world. They did lots of trade and so on. And so because of that, there was issues with disease and biocompatibility and so on. And so I think that environmentalism, I don't think it works on anyone really with an IQ below 90. I just don't think that it does. It generally is more intelligent people, more concerned and curious about the future. And so I think environmentalism in particular, it sterilizes smarter people. And this feeling of, the future is kind of risky, there's fiat currency, there's a lot of national debt. I don't know if I want to have kids. There is that sort of caution, the beginning of Idiocracy, this sort of portrays it very well. Well, the way the market is, I don't know if it's the right time to have kids. And then by the time they want to have kids, it's too late and all that. So putting this general fear and anxiety and future disasters out there, it doesn't affect your IQ 85 people who are just like, let's fuck.
Yeah.
But the smarter, it's a way of sterilizing smarter people. Smarter people, of course, represent a significant threat to the powers that be. So I think there's a wide variety of reasons for these fears, but there are genuine reasons to be concerned. It's just none of what the media or anyone else talks about.
But I think during the 80s, there was an actual threat there with the Soviet Russia and America, Or was that all just made up? I don't know. I don't think so.
I think there was a threat there, but the real threat was not that there was going to be nuclear war.
Yeah.
The real threat was that communism was being brought in through the back door in the West. which is basically what's happened. I mean, what's Obamacare other than halfway communism? What's fiat currency other than government control of the currency, which is a communist practice? So what is central banking other than communism? What are public schools other than communism? What is the military-industrial complex other than exactly what happened under communism? What is government control of the land other than communism? What is government control of food production other than communism? What is government control and creation of the roads other than communism? So this idea that there was this great danger from the Soviet Union. It's like the Soviet Union fell, but the virus had already transferred through the intellectual, through the public schools, through the artists. Well, it had already come over, and so that to me was the real danger, which of course was never talked about.
Yeah, and Western culture isn't inherently. This is my concern, really. Western culture isn't inherently fatalist. Who's it said it? Max Weber argued that capitalism first emerged in Protestant countries and not elsewhere because, as religions go, the Protestant faith was less fatalistic than others, which then brings me to Western teenagers today. So are we becoming, our young generations, I mean, obviously, I got affected a little bit by it. I mean, I grew out of it, you know. If I didn't, I would have become a liberal because, you know, even at the age of like 13, because I was frightened of all these governments, I thought, what would be the solution? I thought, right, what we need is one leader and one government of the world. And this is, you know, I was completely non-political at all at the time. I'm just sort of basing that thoughts at the time on what I was hearing in the news, you know. So basically, back to the point again, are our younger generations becoming more fatalistic and fatalistic to the point, and this is what does concern me a little bit, that fatalistic, that they won't take any action, that it'll just be pure inaction with what I think is coming over the horizon. That's really, really it, you know. I think we can all grow out of it, because obviously we're more susceptible to that when we're younger. But, you know, it can take some people a bit longer, and some people never grow out of it.
Yeah. There's a great quote from H.L. Mencken, Mencken, who almost always rewards anybody who reads him with great insights. This is a famous quote, but I think it encapsulates what we're talking about. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous to be led to safety, by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary.
All of them.
All of them imaginary.
Well, yeah, good quote. Yeah.
And as far as fighting it goes, I'm not sure the degree of enthusiasm and activism that young people, I don't really have much contact with young people who are activists, but it's not looking good. You know, there was this study, I think it was at Yale, where it's not a study, but a sort of on-the-street thing where they were more than happy to give up their rights of freedom of speech. And we have all of this nonsense about safe spaces and hug rooms and triggerings and all this, a bunch of hysterics. And hysteria is fundamentally fascistic. Hysteria is when opposing ideas so provoke your anxiety that you wish to lash out and destroy them. And it is childish. It is, dare I say, single mom womanly. And this is, of course, you know, this is a bunch of young people all raised by women, all raised by single moms or with women in power, with women in their daycares and in their primary schools and in their junior highs. So this is a generation of men raised by women and women raised by women, and they're all hysterical and they can't handle contrary opinions, which is not unknown to some women. Let me put it to you that way. So, you know, they've always said, well, if women around the world, it'll be a paradise. Well, let's, you know, we are now in the process of finding out exactly what the world looks like when women are basically in charge of just about everything. And, you know, the rough and tumble of male play where you don't give quarter, you fight hard and you win, and and you debate and you argue and you make fun of anybody who takes it so personally that they burst into tears. That's how I grew up. I don't know if that's how you grew up. You sound Scottish, so I assume so. Yeah. It's like, I'm sorry if you're crying because you lost the argument. You're roundly mocked, and that's how it should be. It's how it should be, because feelings are not tools of cognition, as the late, great Ayn Rand memorably said. Mm-hmm. Feelings are not tools of cognition. And the fact that people are upset is absolutely irrelevant. And all it does is signal that they're not capable of mature and reasoned debate. And it doesn't mean don't get upset. I mean, people can get upset, passionate, they can yell and scream. I know I do. But if you feel that the other person should stop talking because you're upset, then you're a crybaby, right? You're a weeping fascist. You've got your fist is curling underneath your wet handkerchief in order to punch people who are upsetting you, and it means that you have no self-mastery, you have no self-governance, you have no capacity to manage your emotions. You are less than a child. You're an infant, right? Children know how to manage their emotions, but at least if they're taught well. But babies simply can't be talked out of feeling bad. They have overwhelming stimuli, and it simply means that these people, for reasons of parenting and reasons of media reinforcement, they have simply not realized that other people's offensive statements can't kill you. But wishing to squelch other people's offensive statements will kill civilization.
Yeah. There's only one solution, really, is it? Free society, peaceful parenting.
Yeah,
it really will have to come down to that.
Yeah, that's how it's got to go. All right, man, can I move on to the next caller? Great questions, though.
All right, thanks for having me. It was great.
You're very welcome. Come back anytime.
All right, bye.